Nation. Join us now for Family Mix Mondays with licensed professional counselor Jaketra Bryant. Tune in as Jaketra shows the different dynamics that make up family. Whether you represent the nuclear family, single parent, extended, grandparent, or blended family, Jaketra has tips and advice designed to strengthen your family structure. Source Nation, here is your host, Jaketra Bryant.
Good evening, Source Nation. I am your host, Jaketra Bryant, and I want to welcome you to Family Mix Mondays, which is a show where I discuss so many dynamics with parenting, from breaking cycles, from communication to talking about, schools, families getting involved, and tonight is no different. Today we'll be ending our series of parenting a child with special needs. But before I jump into our final series, let me stop for a moment and thank our sponsors. And they are Paper to Film Productions, Revolutionary Meals, Scott Cares Foundation, and Urban Grandstand Digital. And so when we get back from our break, I have Patrick O'Brien, who's a special education teacher, that's going to come in the studio and give you so much information on what's going on in the school system and how his school has been a great help. And so after the break, we'll jump into our discussion.
Source Nation, stay tuned. You're listening live to Family Mix Mondays with your host, Jaketra Bryant.
Source Radio Network is just one of the many platforms that is used to fulfill dreams of our listeners and create a purpose that will impact the lives of our communities, cities, and the world. It is often said that great things will happen when a group of driven people work together to accomplish one goal. We're giving people the opportunity to have a voice, translate words that haven't been heard, and paint pictures that no one has seen. Source Radio Network is fueling your life's purpose. How can you listen? www.blogtalkradio.com/Source Radio.
Welcome back, Source Nation. You're listening live to Family Mix Mondays with your host, Jaketra Bryant.
Welcome back, Source Nation. Again, I'm your host, Jaketra Bryant, and you are listening live with Family Mix Mondays. And as stated before, I am going to finish up my series of parenting a child with special needs. We've had some really great guests this month, and we've had a lot of education from a doctoral standpoint with research to parent standpoints. And last week, a really great guest that actually had autism himself and shined some light on this great alternative baseball program that he has going and really moving forward in the community to play some education with those who have those disabilities. And tonight we're going to continue it. And as we finish up, we have Patrick O'Brien. But before he joins me, I want to stop and just tell you some things about him. And so Patrick O'Brien is a special educator with 5 years of experience working with middle school students. He teaches primarily in a self-contained model, working with students of various disabilities and levels of academic functioning. He also works with a variety of behavioral and medical homebound students. He's a graduate of the University of South Carolina Upstate with a bachelor's in special education of learning disabilities from K through 12th grade. And so he's going to be in the studio joining me to discuss some more of our series. And so I believe that we have our guest in the studio. So hello, Patrick, and welcome to Family Mix Mondays.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me. And so as you know, we've been in our series of parenting a child with special needs, and we're going to just end this awesome series with you, and just kind of discuss some educational standpoints in the school systems with our families. But before you and I jump into that discussion, tell Source Nation any other things that you want them to know about you and any things you have going on.
Sure. Well, I am a special education teacher. As you pointed out, I teach in middle school, and I'm work in the upstate of South Carolina, working with middle school students on various different subjects, primarily English, reading, science, and social studies. And I've had a great opportunity, one of the best jobs in the world, to be able to work with parents, children, and specialists that are involved in the field of special education.
Yes, and so thank you so much for being an educator and definitely choosing special education. So I kind of wanted to jump right in with that. What made you decide on special education as the area of focus?
Well, special education is an important part of my family. My mother was a special education teacher with 35 years of experience. My grandmother worked in her younger days as a sort of an interventionist or a specialist to help children who were behind. And education runs in my family, but special education, I was attracted to it primarily because it allows me to have creative freedom with a population of learners that are deserving of assistance. They need assistance, and it's not necessarily the most popular field. And what I saw was, instead of a challenge or a struggle or a mandated sort of instruction, I saw the opportunity to work with students and to use alternative methods. And I felt that was an opportunity, a gateway for me to put my personality in play, but to also be creative and to do whatever it takes to help kids make progress by using different methods, maybe some out-of-the-box strategies that maybe aren't as commonplace inside of a general education room, where there are, rigorous tests that have to be met. Grades are extremely important, and those things are important in special education too. But I've been given the opportunity through special ed to focus on helping a student make progress and less about sometimes their direct GPA or how they perform on the big national standardized tests. I get the opportunity to come into my room and help turn not only to create independent adults, but also well-educated children that are able to function independently in life, but also to get the academics they need so that they can transition to that lifestyle. And that was what drew me into the field, where the opportunity to make a difference with kids, where there's a guarantee that these kids are going to get the service, these young men and women are going to get the help that they need, and there are a bevy of tools and resources that can help me do that. And it was very exciting to be able to become a part of that field.
Yeah, I commend you for that. I remember when it came to just elementary school life and middle school life, just not really having an understanding of what special education is or was, and having, I guess, a lot of the students be separate from the other regular ed classrooms, and now having that negative perception of it. And so, as I got older, that is something that I wanted to make sure I knew more about, and I'm so glad, this was one of the suggestions for a topic so that people actually can learn what special education is, what different disabilities are, and how people can be very creative with their approach. And a lot of these students can be very successful in so many areas. So I definitely commend you for even choosing that and having such an open mindset with that. So I guess with that being said, what's been one of the most rewarding things about being a part of your school and working with the special education classroom for you? Well,
it's really hard to narrow it down. There have been a lot of experiences that I've had with students in the classroom. There's been experiences that I've had with students outside of the classroom that meant a lot. It's been a wonderful opportunity to be able to have these moments. But when you work in middle school and when you work with sometimes the very different things that we do, getting to see students be successful with something that they weren't before, and something is something that all teachers, I'm sure, are drawn to see that smile. But for me, I can recall back to one of my very first years of teaching. I had a student named Miriam, and I'll know and remember her forever because she's very special to me. One of my first students, and Miriam came in, and this was a student with a learning disability, and she really, 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 really struggled with reading. When I was her teacher, I was able to teach her for 3 years. Her very first year of teaching me, of me teaching her, she would come in and put her head down on the desk. And she was reading significantly below, about 4.5 to 5 grade levels below her grade at that time. And whenever she would encounter adversity, she would just put her head down, lost in some sort of depression and anxiety. She would never participate in class, and she was hesitant to speak. She was embarrassed about the rate at which she read words. And being a younger teacher, and I tend to have a lot of energy and teach with a lot of passion, and so I think maybe sometimes I can be overwhelming to some of the students, but working with her, I discovered in her that her disability was educational, and I knew this coming out of college, that the learning disability for this particular student affects her ability to successfully access language and numbers in the print form that we do. But what I discovered was that Miriam had many, many, many talents outside of that arena and zero confidence to pursue them. And the moment that I look back on, and will always look back on, is when she finished her 8th grade year and was going to high school. Halfway through that year, I got a message from her mother. And her mother sent me a message, and inside the message was to give her a call. So I gave her a call in the afternoon, and she told me, she said, I don't know what you've done with my daughter, but I'm going to tell you, she is sassy, and she's talking back, and I've not seen confidence like that, and it's your fault. And I remember I was so excited, and I said, well, I love it. I'm okay if you don't, because that student was confident enough to speak her mind and express what she wanted, express what she didn't like, and wasn't afraid that if she did so, she wouldn't put that head down. And putting her head down and crying or not participating in anything was what she came into special education with me as. And when she went out, she was a completely different person. She made and was one of the first students at our school that made the gifted and talented art program called Art Visions, and she still continues to participate in that at the high school level. And so whenever I see her, her mother gives me a hard time about how sassy she is, what a smart mouth she's got. And I say, well, that's fine. I'll take the credit for that. You can have the credit for everything you've done for her at home. But just getting to see a student transform like that, that's what draws you to the field.
Yes, that's amazing. And that's one trend I actually was hearing on the show previously as well. The particular young man had spoken about that he actually did not speak until I believe it was like 5 or 6, and another father also spoken to his child not speaking to 5 or 6. So I know that is pretty common. So that has to be a major accomplishment when you're seeing not only complete sentences and being able to have this conversation dialogue, but the confidence behind it to do so.
Yes, ma'am. That is one other thing that we see. And I want to make sure I'll put this on there. I'm one teacher out of that many years. That student has had fantastic high school educators working with her. She had tremendous elementary school teachers that helped her before. Special education is a team. And while we love to look on memories, and we still have to collaborate, we're gears. Special education teachers, ideally the way the law is designed, and sometimes that execution is different than what we'd like it to be. But at our very best, we're important team players. And for Miriam, I was able to be a gear that found a place to fit with her other gears. And the teachers that have come both before and after, in addition to having great family support, were able to make all of them turn and make those teeth mesh so that she can start making progress. And so I want to make sure that I add that credit for some of those gains is due to the student, her family, but also the other teachers that she's had. It takes a team when we work in this field.
Yes, I love it. I'm so glad you said that. So I was wondering, so as some of our Source Nation family members may actually have students who have just been recently diagnosed with some of the particular special education disabilities, which particular disabilities do you often service that you're seeing most common in the classroom?
Sure. In the area in which I teach, upstate South Carolina, the most common disability for students that I see in my classroom are students that have a specific learning disability. Now, some states have different terminology, so I can only speak from the area in which I teach. But a specific learning disability is when a student struggles to perform in academics, such as reading, math, written expression, but they have average intelligence. So there's an unexplained neurological issue. Sometimes that falls under an umbrella. So when we say a student has a learning disability, we tend to generalize those and say, oh, well, this student has dyslexia, or this student has dyscalculia, or this student exhibits this educational disorder or deficit, and certain states have different language where they call things. But at the end of the day, the most common are the specific learning disabilities. Now, there are other settings which sometimes categorize students. Probably behind specific learning disabilities, we serve lots of children, an increasing number of students with autism, as well as other health impairments. And other health impairments are another umbrella term, so to speak, you kind of classify some of your medical diagnoses of ADD, ADHD, some other things where a health situation affects a child's education. So specific learning disabilities are the most prevalent. Probably your students that have severe ADD and ADHD come in second with other health impairments, and then intellectual disabilities and students with autism are the four most common that I've worked with in my years in the field.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to talk more about, I saw your bio that mentioned that there's a self-contained model that y'all often use. And so I wondered if you can speak more about what that model actually looks like for your classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way I can think to explain this, and if you're learning more about special education, or maybe you're new to understanding it, think of a ladder and think of the rungs on that ladder. And let's say the top of that ladder, the very top of it, is where a student is in the regular education classroom, taking the same classes, working on the same kinds of reading, the same kinds of math, as most of the other kids are in that classroom. So say a fourth grader would be in the fourth grade room with a regular education teacher, taking all the same classes and doing all the same things by themselves independently. That'd be the top rung of that ladder, where they're in with their peers without disabilities. The self-contained model is a few steps down that ladder, maybe 3 to 4 steps down that ladder, where I'm working with students who, instead of spending all day with a regular education teacher, spending most of their day with a special education teacher, where they are using research-based, scientifically developed alternative curriculums, and they're functioning with an IEP. And we can talk more about that perhaps a little bit later, but the IEP is a document, the fluid working document, where a team of people come together to specify what kind of help a student needs, where they're going to get that help, and what it's going to look like, in addition to talking about where they function. So if a student doesn't have any disabilities and doesn't have any problems at the top of the ladder, I'm somewhere down toward maybe a couple steps down, where a student is no longer in with their regular education peers most of the day. Now, I would like to add, if I can, we'll talk about my program, if I can, just for a second. Our program at the school in which I teach is unique. It's a tremendous opportunity. I work with amazing coworkers and aides. Another teacher, Melody Johnson, and Kim Blackwell and I function together. There are 3 of us that teach. In fact, our rooms are all right next to each other in an L. And we have the world's best aides and paraprofessionals who help us in our room or to make this possible. But all of our kids pulled out of the regular education environment for math, reading, science, social studies. They still change classes like middle schoolers do. They use lockers if they want to. They've got to go from bell to bell to bell. They eat lunch with everyone else. They go to recess with everyone else. And they also attend their specials, their PE, their gym, art, gateway to technology, keyboarding, whatever electives they want to take. They mainstream out and take those classes with their peers. So our students are able to get the intense support that they need through the IEP, but they're also able to have that middle school experience with those transitions and that independence. And it's a really awesome program with really great coworkers, and we're able to give the students a feel for what that middle school experience feels like. It helps sometimes with some of the stigmata or the stereotypes of, well, I'm in special education, I don't get to change classes, I'm in self-contained. Our students don't have that, so they're able to come into the school and not have to worry about those things.
I love that approach, and I love the fact that there is a tri-team, I guess, if you will, of just having like 3 other people involved to make this experience very normal. If I can recall correctly, my middle school years were just already something that I was trying to adjust to when it came to hormones and all kind of things happening. And I don't think that was the year they introduced uniforms to our school, but so clothing was even an issue, like with who kind of had the latest shoes. So I can imagine now if you're having to come to a school and not be a part of this other transition that you're watching your peers do. So I applaud y'all with just even noticing that this was important too, to have these same transitions happening with changing classes, something as small as changing classes, and recognizing how important that is for the student. Have y'all seen?
It's really fun. It's really cool. It's a tremendous program. It's a privilege to teach there and be a part of that. I have taught in other ways before. In my first couple of years of teaching, my students were with me primarily most of the day, and that was a different situation with different learners. But the amount of growth that we can get from our kids in this model, in this setting, is really special, and I'm privileged to be part of a great team doing it. I would love. I wish it was more common. I realize that it's not, and some of that is, there's various challenges, bell schedules, the amount of teachers that are available in a building. It really is an amazing opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And I think also remember very, very early on with just this idea you had of how you wanted to approach this particular population. So I think one of the things is like as educators, people have to go in with having this creative mindset that literally there is not one student that's alike. Like we may have the category of autism or category of ADHD or category of like a learning disability or dyslexia, but it doesn't all look the same per age, per person, per ethnicity. Like it really doesn't. And to be able to recognize that and still have that creative approach that y'all created is really mind-blowing.
Yeah, and what I was able to do is I joined this team of 3 teachers after another teacher moved on to a different opportunity. And when I became a part of it with Melody and Kim, and we worked together, we have in our classrooms, in that self-contained setting, students of various disabilities. We teach primarily students with learning disabilities, but we have students in there that range in academic levels from pre-kindergarten to kindergarten, all the way up to students who we actually are able to place in regular education classes in ELA, math, social studies. We're going to try a student this year in science out in the general education environment in the hopes of we can push them to make enough progress that they would be able to pursue their diploma. And not all of our students are able to do that. An amount of them are. It's dependent on many factors. But, yes, at any one time in a classroom, you can have, and as we do, we have students with learning disabilities, autism, emotional disabilities, intellectual disabilities, other health impairments, multiple disabilities, with those levels changing. So you have to be prepared to serve a variety of students. That is a challenge, and it is a challenge that is best met with a team. It would be impossible for me to make a dent in that, or my coworkers to make a dent. You can be a tremendous educator, but it takes a team. And special education should be a team. It should be a collaborative process, whether you're in self-contained or resource, which would be a step higher up that ladder, where maybe you get a little bit of help for an hour, maybe 2 hours a day. Hopefully, what we can experience, both maybe parents that are listening that are in special education currently, maybe they're just starting out in that field, or maybe they're experienced with it, that it should be a collaborative team process. That's what it's designed to be, and it's going to be the most effective when it is.
So, Source Nation, if you are just tuning in, you're listening to Family Mix Mondays, and I'm your host, Jaketra Bryant. And tonight our special guest is Patrick O'Brien, a special education teacher from middle school. and we are continuing our series of parenting a child with special needs. So if you would love to be a part of this conversation and ask Patrick a question, the number to dial in is 619-924-0933 and press option 1. Again, that number is 619-924-0933 and press option 1, and we'll be glad to take your calls. And so, Patrick, I just am really blown away by definitely like the particular model that has everyone involved. And I think that is so important. And I think that's something that is often missed, especially when it comes to like the education system, with really knowing that each person's role really does play a part of it. Just like you stated earlier with the young lady who had such a successful story with being sassy and talking back, but had so much confidence. Each person along her way just really played a big role. And so I was wondering, like, what have you noticed or what have you heard from parents of those particular students that y'all service about some benefits of doing this particular model at your middle school?
So the feedback that we get from our kids, and as part of the special education process, we're in contact with our parents quite a bit. It is mandated that students that receive special education service receive progress reports on their annual goals, which are the areas that they are receiving help in. And in addition to any normal communications a teacher would have about problems at school, grades, in addition to things like that. So you have extra frequency, extra monitoring. With parents that we meet, and we have annual reviews on each of our IEPs at least once a year, and we collaborate with our parents when we need to. Most of the feedback that we get from parents, it's sometimes not as specific about our program. Our program is kind of unique, and we serve students that live and reside primarily in the area of the school. So the best feedback that we get is when we do place students out, we move them up to high school, they move on in their area, and their mom and dads come back 2 or 3 years later, and they'll say, boy, I just wish they were in that model again, or that was great. They enjoyed school the most when they were like that. They haven't had another math teacher like Miss Johnson or like another reading teacher like Miss Blackwell. They haven't had that experience. And so that, to us, is the biggest compliment when we see the kids go out and they're successful, and also when they're happy. The immediate feedback is there, but the best thing that we get is the communication, being able to get that access with those parents to have that communication. It's really, really important that all the members of a child's IEP team not only come to meetings, not only are active and participate, but also, are able to have their opinions and their information considered. You need everybody to collaborate, especially when a child is just entering special education, or maybe there's been a child has been referred to see if they might be eligible. Those are extremely critical times with parents that we get to talk with them, because quite frankly, sometimes we need to be able to provide education to families as to the options that are available in their communities. So getting that audience with those parents and getting to see them not just when they finish with us or on a year-to-year basis, but sometimes down the road. And you get to see those kids, and they're excited to see, and they want to come give you a hug, or the parents say something about the child's previous education. Those are the areas where we get that, when they are able to get exposed to all 4 subject areas, including science and social studies in our model, because they're able to stay engaged and stay involved. And so that's the biggest compliment a team can get, when you see a student that's happy and successful down the road and you hear it from their parents.
Let's talk about that actual parental involvement. I think like you hit on a lot of good points there, especially with like the IEP and kind of being hands-on and doing more than just that. And so I know by middle school years, I imagine this is the first time that, maybe not first time, but some parents may be actually seeing some particular changes with their students' behavior or reading levels, and maybe IEP is just not introduced to those parents. And so have you seen that pretty often? This is the first time, and if so, what's been something that has been helpful that you've given parents so that they can actually really be involved and adjust into this?
Right. That's a fantastic door to open, because that's the most critical area we can talk about. I can tell you, and I can tell you 100% from experience, that as a teacher who teaches in the self-contained model, I went back to that ladder, and I said I was 3 or 4 steps down maybe from the top of that ladder. My environment is somewhat restrictive because our students are removed for most of the day. And generally, when a student comes to my classroom or our classroom and they've already been removed from most of their regular education classes, it means they've been receiving some support for some time. And so we have very few, if any, first-time IEPs or first-time experiences. But we do get some parents who come to a meeting or they come to meet the teacher day, and it's the first time that they've had an opportunity to understand the IEP or understand what's going on other than, well, the school said my son and my daughter need some help. But as far as that goes with the parent's role, that speaks directly to what we need parents to be. And I'm going to speak as a teacher, and I'm a parent. I have two daughters. They do not have special needs. I work as hard as I can to always consider the parent's perspective. In an IEP team, especially when a student is being told about an IEP or parents are being educated, they're probably working with a teacher in the resource setting. A resource teacher would be, say, one step down from the top of the ladder, maybe two, where it's just being discovered that a student needs some help. If we've got that happening, then it's our job to explain the process. And process for parents is this. If a teacher recommends your child for a special education referral, or you suspect that your child is struggling with special needs or needs some accommodations or other things, you need to have that conversation. But what's important is that a parent and the student are both members of that IEP team. We need you to come to the meetings. You as a parent you can contact your school and request a referral. You can see, hey, I need someone to check out. Is there something going on here? These struggles have been happening for a while. Or that's a critical part. We need parents to be at meetings, to be the expert on their child. Everyone that comes to a meeting, and that's generally 5 people, an LEA, which is usually your principal or an assistant principal. You're going to have a regular education teacher, a special education teacher, a therapist if it's needed, sometimes a psychologist, especially if it's an initial referral, and everyone at that table, and the parent and the student, and everyone at that table is a team member that needs to be the expert in their field. The special educator should be able to focus on their methods and their curriculums and their programs, where maybe the LEA is your principal, your assistant principal. They're aware of the student and their progress and what some options are inside the district. Parent needs to come to the table with how they see their child functioning outside of school, what they've seen at previous things. But the most important thing a parent can do is be present and involved. You need to be present and involved. If someone invites you to a meeting, work with them. Try to get there. If you can't, I bet every special education teacher worth their salt will reschedule. Find a way to convene, even if it's by telephone or in today's world, FaceTime, whatever it takes. Get involved. Listen to that information and share your input on what you see with your child, because that information is vital to empowering the other people on that team to make educational decisions that are going to have the best impact. If you see things at home or certain things don't come up in testing, those are major areas that we need you to be the expert on. So come to meetings, be involved, and share that input, and work with that team, realizing that it's the goal of everybody there, although many options may be discussed, to find the pathway that's most effective for the child. And we need everyone to bring their role to the table.
I like the fact that you said everybody's an expert in that area. And that's something that I remember I had to learn just with just life in general. One thing that was burning me out as a licensed professional counselor and having an elementary school kid myself is the fact that I wanted to be every part for him, and how that really was burning me out. And so I love the fact that you're still an expert with your own child, and no one's taking that power away but each expert has a great input to even give so the child can be successful with their academics and in social skills in life. And so I like the fact that, there's an empowerment from all roles. No one's
it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely vital. It's got to be a collaborative approach. It has to be. It's going to be most effective when it is. Serving the kids in the community, serving our little ones in elementary school, to our young men and women who are becoming adults in high school, we've got to serve their needs, and that starts and ends with a team. It's no one person's decision. No one goes into a meeting to win. Those aren't things just because there's 3 or 4 people at a table from the school, and they may have an opinion. I can tell you, as a special education teacher, when I go into meetings and I'm drafting an IEP to present to parents, I'm going in there with the process of, I've got to recommend what is best in my opinion for this child. And I know that sometimes, sometimes what I'm going to say, you may have a different opinion, or the principal may have a different opinion. But it's my job to advocate for that child's education. What few people realize is that it's the parent's job to advocate for their child and their needs. It's my job to advocate for what I think is in their educational best interest. And maybe resolving disputes is another conversation, maybe not for this podcast. But the point is that parents should never be faulted for advocating for their child and working with a team. That's a far different thing. There are many resources and options available through the community and through school districts. It's even different district to district. But the point is that the parent has got to be involved so that they can monitor that progress, because that way when you come to a meeting, it doesn't seem so overwhelming, or the options make sense. Or you can say, well, I can tell you right now, I did that all last summer and it didn't work. So maybe you can look at some different options down the road. Absolutely. Very important.
I really love that, and I applaud that. And so for our parents who are a part of the First Nation family who are listening, so I definitely hope that they are really seeing that how they can actually be involved in the IEP. And I know IEP definitely is across the state, but I'm sure the model still stands when it comes to wanting these particular people involved and knowing, like, just educate yourselves with it. And so I heard you before mention that some of the students came in with maybe elementary school reading levels and a lot of grade average levels from which their age group is from the middle school. And so I was wondering, have you seen a change with those particular reading levels increasing or grades increasing due to doing the approach like you and your other teammates do with the model?
Absolutely, we see growth in our kids. And, we see growth. We see varied kinds of growth. The growth that is acceptable for a student depends on that student. There are some things that are consistent across the United States, and that's due to IDEA, which is a federal law that provides special education for students with disabilities. There are some things that are consistent, and one of them is that the students with disabilities are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. And I'm pretty sure that everybody is familiar with the word free and public and education, but it's that A and FAPE, that appropriate. That's the one that's up for debate. What is appropriate? For example, a student may make half a year's growth. Maybe in what we do with a lot of testing and scores, say I give a student a reading test, and he reads about 61 words per minute on a second grade level, and they're in the 6th grade. If at the end of the year, that student is reading, say, 100 words per minute on a second grade level, that is tremendous growth. When you look at the growth, it has to be based on the student's ability for achievement. The ability refers to maybe a student's cognition. Maybe it's to an IQ score. Maybe it's to some psychological testing. But that's that ability. The achievement is what those students can show us on paper. So that's the trick, is identifying a student's ability and projecting their achievement, and then putting the tools in place to help them make progress. This past year, we were able to send a couple students to the high school pursuing their diploma. No guarantee they'll make it. But I had a student with autism a couple of years ago jump nearly 3 grade levels of functioning in 1 year in reading class with Ms. Blackwell. And he was with me his 6th grade year. He made very minimal progress. About halfway through his 2nd year, his parents pushed. They wanted him up into another level, and I agreed. And we placed him into a more rigorous ELA, and he shot up like a rocket, up to a Lexile score of 880, which is quite high for him. You're looking there at the 880 level, which is a fancy word. That's a way to measure how hard a text is to read, like what grade level it's on, he made almost shot up all the way to above 5th grade levels of functioning. Didn't happen for him immediately. Didn't happen his first year with me full-time teaching reading. But when he was into a different placement and it was a different fit, he exploded. We absolutely see the growth, and we see the best growth when all the members of the team, parents, teachers, and students are engaged and involved.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so excited for that student. And I would imagine with having this particular model and everyone involved in the passion, if they share the passion, the other two teachers share the passion that you have, I can imagine the work that's done and the students actually feeling as if someone cares, because that also makes a difference with how much you feel that this teacher actually cares about your success, and not just the standardized testing or not just getting over the year, but really how well you do and that you really can come out of here confident and reading. And so I know there's many more stories.
There are many. It would be hard to choose some. But with special education, it's about that communication, working with that. I've had parents that I've met. We've had 2 or 3 meetings in a row because we couldn't agree on services, and I want to make sure that I address one of the areas of special education, the misconception maybe sometimes we have, is that it can be a lot of paperwork, it can be a lot of communication, a lot of attachment, and it can be. And it's not all amazing success stories. We have students that make minimal growth, and sometimes students don't make growth at all. But when that does happen, you have a great team, if everyone's engaged, to fall back on, to talk, communicate, and work together to keep trying to find a different method, a different strategy, a different area, a different level of focus. And that all happens to the meetings. And it's highly dependent on each teacher, the student, what the curriculum that they use, and how they fit. It's very different, it's very unique, it's very individual, literally individual in an individual education plan. But when you have the backbone of the team and people making cohesive decisions instead of combative ones, that's where you get into really seeing the best success.
When it comes to the parental side of things, and I know you mentioned about definitely staying involved in the IEP, but what about like the actual homework or the actual classroom or the actual follow-up and skills? How can parents get more involved with supporting, or how has your parents, I guess rather, been involved with supporting, continuing what you're pouring into them at home?
Well, one of the big, and I can jump right out. I've got a great answer for this one. I can jump right out and say, parents, trust your teachers. Trust them. The methods they use, they might be literally upside down, if you've done any regrouping with some of these Common Core standards that have been taught recently, over the ways that we were raised or the ways that our mom and dads worked with us on. Trust your teachers. Trust their curriculums. Trust their methods. That doesn't mean believe everything you see, but trust them. Give them a chance. If they have homework and the teacher asks for you to do it a certain way, trust me when I tell you, try it. And if you don't see the progress, talk about it. But support that teacher. We need support in our classrooms. We need to be consistent so that a student has one expectation at home, one expectation at school, and they can have consistent methods. That's really important. Trust us. And why we're pleased that you trust us is this. We don't get into these jobs on accident. We choose to become special education teachers. 99.99% of us choose to become this field. And we choose it because we're drawn to it, because we love it, because we want to help, we want to make a difference. We're not as a whole in there to make your life more complicated or to be that way. But when we are using different educational methods, or a student is behind on grade level, sometimes implementing those alternative strategies is hard. It's different, and it looks different, and it feels weird. So if you're not sure or you disagree, communicate, but give your teachers a chance. Let them try to implement it. Those alternative methods might end up being the best thing, but you got to trust them, and just trust us that we will take care of your child's educational needs. And that doesn't mean to back off. By all means, stay engaged. But trust the team of people that are at that table.
Yeah, I love that advice because I would imagine, like I said, I have a 9-year-old and my son's Christian, and every time, like, we've had a few school changes, I'm so hands-on. I need to know, like, what's going on in this classroom, that classroom, with this person, who's new, and every single thing. And my hands are probably a little too much on, and maybe there is a portion of trust that I need to work on. So I love the word that you used. And I think it's really important, especially after you've been given this diagnosis. And all of a sudden you got these new changes of life where you got to come to IEP meetings, and everything's kind of different. The viewpoint you had about how education was going to go, now it's going to go a little bit more creatively. And so I think that's a great advice to say, just trust the teachers, and knowing that there are some passionate people who are very caring about the success of your child, and that, you know, we're all working as a team for it. And so, like, as we wrap up, Patrick, I do want to make sure that, like, that you are able to just kind of discuss the social piece. And I love your model and how it actually normalizes with changing classes, and even reading and confidence is something that affects someone in communicating and socially. And so I was wondering, when it comes to the interaction that you see amongst the other middle school students who are maybe in the general education classes, do you see a sense of, like, more social skills being developed and more interactions with peers with confidence shown because of their reading grade changes and academic changes?
Yeah, absolutely. As a student becomes more academically successful, usually increased confidence is a byproduct of that. But what I would say is, in middle school, especially with students that have specific learning disabilities, you'll see that they're capable of learning many things just fine. They pick up on all the latest trends, and they're in on all the greatest jokes, the latest apps on social media, the latest hashtags, whether they've got the latest and greatest fidget spinners or cubes, or they're pulling off the water bottle flip, and they're doing it just fine at the lunch table. And most of our students are able to socially have relationships with peers quite normal. But what happens is, the older they get, the more obvious that their academic struggles become. And so when they're in classrooms with peers and they do struggle to read, you know, you can see some of those things. Sometimes you see some behavior problems. But when a student is making academic progress, generally they're going to display good social behavior. But special education doesn't stop at reading and math. We're also charged with providing those appropriate social skills. For instance, in students with autism or with emotional disability, if they struggle to interact appropriately, maybe they don't know how to insert themselves into a conversation, maybe they don't know how to maintain a conversation, that can lead to social skill problems, sometimes even confrontational issues. And so special education can address those areas and those needs as well. We call that functional behavior, and we supervise that functional behavior. And I can tell you, in middle school, we got plenty of it. Got plenty of behavior to take a look at and talk about. And what I find is that most often my students are able to learn many things, such as, say, the latest jokes, or they can memorize how to beat a different video game, or pull off to beat certain levels. And I'll be like, you know, if I could get 5 minutes of that in science, we'd be great. But in reality, it speaks to that effect of that special education doesn't always eclipse all areas of a student's learning. So it's important to identify which areas it does and provide support. That's why students should participate in athletics. They should join school teams. They should take classes. They should do everything they can to maintain those social skills and develop them. And I find, to the contrary, I find that the older the students get, the more accepting they are. In my particular building, I find the 8th graders to be much more accepting of students with disabilities than the 6th graders. But then in our school, we have a large population, and they've been exposed to them and taking classes with them and playing sports with them, so it doesn't come off as big of a problem. But it's definitely an important piece, and social skills can lead to problems, but it can also lead to success, and we see more of the success than we do the problems.
I love it. This has been a really good conversation, Patrick, and I'm so glad that you have been a part of it. And there's been so many points that you really hit, from just the teacher involvement to your team that's been awesome for the schools in South Carolina, to just how parents can get involved. And so I don't want to leave this show without parents and other educators getting an opportunity to just ask you more questions and just find out how they maybe can implement this model, so that we can actually have more schools and more children being successful, and socially, educationally, across the board, relationally, all. So how can the listeners of Source Nation get in touch with you?
The by far the best way to get in touch with me is to email me. My email address is readupalevel@gmail.com. That's readupalevel@gmail.com. Readupalevel.
I think
that's the best way to contact me. I'm not as active on social media or things like that, but the email is the one consistent thing I always have in my pocket. And I'd be happy to try and provide some advice, some general advice, or try to point you in the right direction if I can. And if I don't, I'll try to get you someone that I know or an office to contact that can get you in that right direction.
Well, I do thank you, Patrick, for just being a part of ending our series of parenting a child with special needs, and you brought it on home. And so I'm so glad. And so we will definitely stay in touch and be of any kind of help to one another. And again, I thank you so much for being a part and sharing so much education with the special needs population, for our parents, for other educators, and those adults who just want to be parents and want to find out more about it. So thank you so much for being a part of the call tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm appreciative of the opportunity to talk about the field, and I would look forward to continuing this conversation just about any time or any place anyone wants to. I've got a great opportunity. I've got a great job, and it's something I'm quite passionate about. Hope that I can help anyone that's out there that needs it.
Great. So thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. So Source Nation, that was Patrick O'Brien, and he is a special education teacher at a middle school in South Carolina. And I really hope that you have got so much out of this series, from what the research base looks like, from parental to those individuals who have these disabilities, and now the education standpoint within the school system. And so I just want to extend myself for any further questions or just any thing that you would just like to share. So my email address is jabryant1913@gmail.com. I can also be reached on my website at www.b3mentalperformances.com and found at Twitter at Jaketra B. And so I want you to tune back in next month as I start a new series, and we're going to talk so much about sex education for our kids and just a lot. So parents, tune back in. We have so many awesome guests for next month. So thanks again for joining Family Mix Mondays. I'm your host, Jaketra Bryant.